The guardian of Iron Ridge. "Mister, my father didn't wake up," the little girl begged. What the silent blacksmith did shocked everyone. Winter Dawn 1874. Frontier town of Iron Ridge, Montana Territory. Snow lay heavy over the town, blanketing roofs, fences, and the public square in a hush of white. The morning light was pale gray, the wind sharp and bitter as it slid across frozen benches and empty streets. On a lonely bench by the old stagecoach stop sat a man slumped forward, his head bowed, cloak wrapped tight around his thin shoulders. His hand hung limp over the edge of the bench. Breath came in shallow, rasping breaths, faint in the bitter cold. Nearby, a small girl stood clutching a faded, tattered coat around her father, her little boots pressed against packed snow. The coat was barely thick enough to hold warmth, but she pulled it tighter all the same. She looked up at his pale face, then down at her own trembling hands. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just waited for someone who might care. Town folk drifted past. A pair of riders spurred their mounts and hurried on, casting only a glance back. A woman with a market basket crossed the square, quickening her steps. A few others paused, their eyes softening, then turned away. Nobody stopped to help. Farther off, a lone rider broke through the blur of snowfall. The horse was black, its coat flecked with snowflakes, its breath steaming in the cold air. The rider limped slightly. One boot scraped uneven across the snow. He wore a long coat, broad-brimmed hat pulled down low, and kept his head lowered as though the wind itself intimidated him. He was Silas Thorne, known to nearly everyone in town as the silent blacksmith. He reined in his horse midnight as he neared the square. The girl's eyes, a pale, haunted light, caught the glint of metal and the stillness of the rider's stance. Something in them made the rider halt. The little girl dropped to one knee, dust of snow puffing around him, hands clenched together, eyes wide and trembling under the brim of the rider's hat. She spoke, voice soft but carrying. "Mister, my father didn't wake up." Silence fell. The wind paused mid-howl. The horse stamped, but nothing moved. After the girl's plea, Silas dismounted slowly, each step deliberate. He did not kneel. He simply stood, pale face shadowed, eyes fixed on the man slumped on the bench. He reached down, gently lifted him into his arms, careful with his limp frame. He considered Lily with a steady look, then nodded. "He needs warmth. Come with me." He turned, hoisted the man up as though he weighed nothing, and led his black horse by the reins. The girl scrambled up behind the saddle, clutching the coat tighter. The townsfolk paused, unease and wonder in their faces. Some gasped, others muttered, but none moved to stop him. The ride out of town was silent except for the soft crunch of hooves on snowpack. Snow drifted past gnarled fences, through skeletal trees, over silent fields that stretched toward distant hills. Lily pressed her face against the horse's side, fear and hope mingling in her eyes. The man, her father, leaned against her, ragged breath, shallow but still breathing. At the gate of the forge, a solitary lantern glowed in the distance. Light spilled through frosted windows of the large wooden house. Midnight's hooves echoed against the porch as Silas carried the man inside. He laid him gently on a bed near the hearth. The fire had long since died, but he moved quickly, pulled logs, struck flint, coaxed life back to the embers. The room warmed slowly. Outside, the wind howled against shuttered windows. Inside, a small bit of warmth returned to the world. Lily stood by the hearth, coat hanging loose over her, wide-eyed. She glanced at Silas, then at her father, then back at Silas. No words were spoken. None were needed. But in that silent house beneath a pale winter moon, compassion had found its home. For the first time in many years, the snow-covered trail led up to a sprawling forge house, silent against the white hills. No smoke rose from its chimney. No lights glowed through its windows. The place looked like a house long abandoned until Silas Thorne opened the door. Inside, the air was cold. Dust clung to corners. The wood floors creaked under his boots as he carried Caleb across the threshold. He moved through the empty hall without hesitation, past the dark dining room, past the staircase. He entered a room at the end of the hall, small but warmer than the rest. A cast-iron stove sat in the corner. A worn leather armchair faced the hearth. Silas laid Caleb gently onto the bed, his breathing shallow but steady. He placed a folded blanket over him, then crouched to stir the embers in the stove. Sparks flared. He added wood, checked the kettle, poured cold water, and added shavings of ginger root from a jar on the shelf. The scent slowly filled the air. Lily stood silently in the doorway, her hands curled into the sleeves of the oversized coat. Silas nodded toward the cot by the wall. The girl climbed onto it, never taking her eyes off her father. Silas moved with purpose. No wasted motion, no questions. He took a clean cloth from a drawer, dampened it, and laid it gently across Caleb's forehead. When he stirred, he said nothing. He watched the fire for a long while. The room was still. His leg throbbed from the long ride, but he did not shift. The flames reminded him. The memory came unbidden. The roar of fire, the scream of metal, the smell of burning flesh, his own body pinned under the collapsed beams. He remembered waking in agony, smoke choking his lungs, and then hands, a man's voice, calm but firm. He had not known his name, only the pressure of his fingers on the wound, the steadiness in his breath. He had never thanked him. And now this man, the same one, lay in his bed, unconscious. He did not know what to say. He never had. Hours passed. When Caleb finally opened his eyes, he gasped, then tried to sit up. His body trembled from weakness. "Lily," he whispered. "Horse, Lily?" Before Silas could respond, the little girl scrambled off the cot and rushed to his side. He pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. "Are you all right? Are you warm? Did you eat?" Lily nodded quickly, then looked at Silas. The blacksmith stood in the doorway, silent as ever. Caleb followed his daughter's gaze. His eyes landed on Silas, tall, broad-shouldered, hat in hand, coat dusted with snow. His face was unreadable. He tried to speak, but he raised a hand. Without a word, he stepped back into the hall. He watched him go, confused. Then he noticed something resting on the bedside table, a small folded card. With trembling fingers, he picked it up. In simple, careful handwriting, it read, "We do not help the worthy. We help the living." He stared at it for a long time, heart-pounding. In the hall, Silas leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. The fire crackled behind him, and in that house, long silent, something began to stir. Not noise, not words, but warmth, a beginning. The first morning after the storm, Lily followed Silas out to the barn. The snow had begun to melt, leaving behind muddy patches and glistening icicles along the eaves. The forge stretched wide and quiet under the pale sun. Silas moved slowly, his limp more noticeable when the cold settled in his bones. But there was no bitterness in his steps, just quiet purpose. Lily trailed behind him, small boots sinking into the soft ground. At the barn, Midnight stood waiting. The great black horse snorted and dipped its head as Lily approached. Silas handed the girl a brush. "Start at the shoulder. Long strokes." Lily looked up unsure. Silas gave a slow nod. "You will not hurt him. He trusts you." Together they brushed the horse in silence, the steady rhythm of bristles against fur, filling the space between them. Later, Silas showed Lily how to mix feed, careful portions of oats, water, and molasses. Lily's hands were clumsy but eager, and when Midnight nuzzled the pail with approval, she beamed. Inside the house, Caleb watched from the window. His arms were folded across his chest, not from the cold, but from uncertainty. Silas was kind, too kind. He did not understand it. That night, after dinner, he stood near the door with his coat bundled in his arms. "I cannot stay," he said quietly. Silas looked up from the fire. "I do not want to become a burden." He stirred the coals, then said simply, "You are not." That night, he did not leave. They sat by the fireplace, the warmth slowly seeping into old walls and cautious hearts. The crackle of wood was the only sound for a long time until Caleb broke it with his voice, soft but sure. "I was a field medic," he began, staring into the flames. "Wyoming. During the fighting, one day we came across a village. There was a girl, no older than 6, shot through the leg. Command said, 'Leave her. She was native, not one of ours.'" He paused. Silas did not speak. "I stayed behind, carried her 2 miles to a wagon. They called it insubordination. Said I disobeyed direct orders and endangered others. Branded me unstable. Still, no judgment came from the other chair, only the soft sound of a log settling in the fire. I came back north," he continued. "No one would hire me. Rumors spread fast, said I had a temper, that I talked to myself, that I'd lost my mind in the war." He laughed bitterly. "Eventually, I worked for Arthur Vance, mine owner, made me sign a contract. Long official filled with clauses I did not understand. One said if I quit without just cause, I would owe back wages and forfeit custody of Lily." Silas's eyes lifted at that, but his face remained unreadable. "After Lily got sick, I missed 2 days of work. Vance threatened to call the sheriff. I ran." He turned to face him then. "That is why I was out there, why I was too weak to stand. I had not eaten in 2 days." Silas reached for the fire poker, stirring the embers without a word. The silence hung for a beat longer. "I just wanted to keep my girl," he finished. Silas did not speak, but he rose slowly and went to the woodpile. He returned, laid another log on the fire, then sat back down. They sat like that, two quiet figures watching flames dance until the fire dipped low. Later that week, Silas limped into the kitchen to fix the old cabinet hinge. Caleb, cleaning near the sink, caught sight of his leg. The scar, angry and pale, stretched from calf to thigh. He froze. "You were in the fire," he said. Silas paused, hammer in hand. "I remember now," he whispered. "You were the man they pulled out of the rubble. I held your head while they tried to stop the bleeding." He did not look at him. "I saved you." His hand tightened around the nail. A breath passed. "Why did you not say anything?" Caleb asked. His voice was low, quiet as ash. "Because back then, I did not know what was worth saying anymore." And for the first time since he arrived, he truly understood the silence he carried. The morning was cold and gray. Thin mist hung low across the hills, curling around the barn like breath held too long. Silas was chopping wood when the sound of hooves broke the quiet. A man in a long dark coat rode up the path, his boots polished, his hat too clean for a man from these parts. He dismounted with a practiced arrogance, folding a yellowed paper in his gloved hand. "You Silas Thorne?" he asked, brushing dust from his shoulder. Silas set the axe down. He nodded once. "Got business?" the man said, holding out the paper. "For a Mr. Caleb Kane?" Silas didn't move. The man sniffed. "He's still here?" Silas didn't answer. The man shrugged, unfolding the document. Legal summons, signed and sealed. He breached a labor contract with one Arthur Vance. He left before term was completed. "Which means," he smirked, tapping the paper, "he owes restitution, $50. Silas's brow twitched. The man continued, enjoying himself now. Clause 3. Should the debt go unpaid after 3 days, Mr. Kane will be arrested for labor abandonment under state statute. That's desertion. He stepped closer. And as for the child, well, if he's deemed mentally unstable again, which this record suggests, he flicked another document from his coat, then custody is revoked. Girl will be transferred to a state orphanage pending review. A long silence stretched. "You can give him the papers, or I can have a deputy come and do it in cuffs." "Up to you." Still, Silas said nothing. The man chuckled. "You know, folks call you the silent blacksmith." Thought that was just poetic. He turned to leave, but Silas moved first. He stepped forward. No weapon, no raised voice. Just a slow, deliberate advance, every limp accentuated by the cold earth beneath his boots. The man backed up. I was just doing my job." Silas reached out, took the papers, and tore them in half. Then, in half again. He dropped the pieces in the mud. The man paled. "You're making a mistake." Silas didn't answer. He stepped closer, silent until the man turned, scrambled onto his horse and rode off without another word. When the dust settled, Silas looked toward the house. Caleb had not seen, neither had he heard. He went back to work, as if nothing had happened, but Lily had. From the loft window, the girl had watched it all, her small face pressed to the glass. That night, she was unusually quiet. At supper, she barely touched her bread. When Caleb asked what was wrong, she only shook her head. Later, while he folded laundry near the hearth, Lily sat in the corner with a piece of paper and the stub of a pencil. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated. She drew slowly, first the outline of a gate, then a man holding a child, then a rider on a tall black horse standing in front of them. A thick rope stretched across the gate like a barrier. In the sky above, she drew 3 crooked stars. She folded the paper neatly, then tucked it under her blanket. The next morning, Silas was outside hammering a new post into the fence line, sleeves rolled up, breath misting with every strike. Lily walked out quietly, paper in hand. She stood for a moment, watching the man. Then, without a word, she stepped closer and held up the drawing. Silas looked down, his hand still. Lily pressed the paper into his palm. "I hope you are that man," she whispered. Then she turned and went back inside. Silas looked at the paper, and for a long time he did not move. Snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the forge in silence. Not just any silence, but the kind that settled deep in the bones. A sacred, still kind of quiet, the kind that made even wind hold its breath. It was Christmas Eve, though nothing marked it but the date. No sleigh bells, no voices caroling, no wreaths on doors, only the whisper of snowfall, the crunch of Silas Thorne's boots, and the slow ticking of an old wall clock. Silas stood before an old chest at the back of his storage room. The chest was plain, nailed together from pine, worn at the corners. He had not opened it in years, not since the day he folded everything away and swore he would never look back. Dust had thickened over time, turning the hinges dull. When he unlatched it, it groaned quietly, as if reluctant to let memory escape. Inside, beneath old flannel blankets and yellowed papers, lay a small woolen coat, black, with pale blue stitching around the cuffs and collar. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows but still soft. He lifted it with both hands, holding it close. It once belonged to someone who used to run through this house barefoot, whose laughter used to bounce off the rafters like wind chimes. He had been small, about Lily's size. He stood there for a long while, unmoving. The weight of the coat was light, but it pressed on his chest like stone. He did not speak. He folded it slowly, as though the cloth might shatter if bent too sharply, and walked upstairs. Later, when Lily came in from feeding the chickens, cheeks red and fingers numb, she found the coat laid out neatly on her bed. There was no note, no explanation, just a folded piece of warmth waiting. Lily touched it with tentative hands, then slipped her arms into the sleeves. It fit, not perfectly, but closely enough. The girl looked around once, as if someone might be watching, then smiled to herself. That same afternoon, Silas cleared out a dusty corner of the main room. The shelf there was crooked, its joints loose with age. He knelt and fixed it, hammering softly so as not to wake Caleb. Then, from a crate pulled down from the attic, he chose a few children's picture books. Pages yellowed, spines frayed, but the stories still intact. He lined them up one by one with the same precision he had once reserved for forging iron. He said nothing of it. As evening settled, Silas walked the hall, checking the lamps, adding logs to the fireplace. At Caleb's door he paused. From his pocket he pulled out a small brass bell. It had belonged to an old horse harness once. He nailed it gently above the frame. Not loud, just enough. If he stirred too violently, or fell again, he would hear. And then came Christmas Eve. For the first time since returning to the land, Silas did not string lanterns outside his house. No wreath hung from the porch, no pine garland, no flickering light in the window to mark the season. But inside the hearth was alive, the warmth of fire, of something less spoken and more felt. He cooked slowly, deliberately. Cornbread turned golden in the cast-iron skillet. Venison stew simmered low, thick with carrots, potatoes, dried herbs. When it was done, he ladled it into 3 bowls, one smaller than the others, and set them on the table. Lily climbed into her chair, wide-eyed. The scent alone made her lean forward, breathless. She ate without words, as though afraid the food might vanish if she spoke. Bite after bite disappeared until the bowl was scraped clean. Her eyes grew heavy. She slid down from the bench and curled near the fire, belly full, heart quiet. Within minutes, she was asleep, breathing soft and steady. Caleb sat across from Silas, watching his daughter. His voice broke the silence. "I cannot remember the last time she ate without rationing every bite," he whispered. "Or the last time I saw her fall asleep with a full belly." Silas did not answer. He simply nodded and reached for the ladle, adding more stew to his bowl. Caleb touched his hand briefly. "Thank you." Later, after the house had gone still, Silas remained by the hearth. Lily's drawing lay on the mantel, the one of the rider guarding the gate. Beside it was a small envelope. He opened it. Inside, Lily had written, "Dear Santa, I don't want a toy. I just want someone to make Papa smile again and maybe give him warm food and help him not cry alone anymore. I can be good. I will help, please. Love, Lily." Silas stared at the note. He did not weep, but he did not stir either. The fire behind him burned down ember by ember. Ash settled, and for the first time in years, the silence around him did not feel empty. It felt holy. The snow had not let up. It fell slow and steady, as Silas saddled midnight before first light. He wore his old coat patched at the elbow and carried no weapon, only a leather folder under his arm. When Lily came to the doorway, half awake, Silas placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, firm and steady. "I'll be back before nightfall," he said. Lily nodded, not asking where he was going. Caleb was still asleep. Silas did not wake him. It took nearly 2 hours to ride to the county office in Blackwood. The streets were slick with ice and the town barely stirred. Silas dismounted, tying midnight outside the red brick building that housed the sheriff, clerks, and the Office of Legal Affairs. People watched him as he limped up the steps. Some nodded. Most simply stepped aside. He walked past the front desk without speaking, straight into the heart of the building, where a balding man with gold spectacles sat behind a stack of papers. This was Everett Miller, the district's legal overseer, known more for procedure than mercy. Miller looked up, startled. "Mr. Thorne, you were not expected." Silas placed the folder on the desk. "I do not make appointments," he said simply. Miller adjusted his glasses, opening the folder. Inside were 2 documents. 1. A bank draft for the full amount listed in Caleb Kane's contract. 2. A notarized employment agreement bearing Silas Thorne's name, offering him full-time employment at his forge with full housing, medical provisions, and legal guardianship protections for Lily. Miller whistled low. That is substantial. Silas's voice was calm. I have 2 offers for you. He raised a single finger. First, you take the draft and erase the contract and all legal record tied to it permanently. Then a second finger. Second, if you decline that, you file this new contract showing that he is employed under a permanent post with my endorsement and protected under my name. You list me as his legal guarantor. Either way, you do not take him. You do not take his daughter. Miller blinked. Mr. Thorne, this man has a record. Silas stepped forward. He saved a life when others turned away. That record is worth more than any paper in this room. Miller leaned back, studying the man in front of him. Why do you care? Silas answered, voice low but unwavering. Because he once saved me. Now it is my turn to keep him safe. Silence settled like dust in the room. Miller stared at him, then slowly removed his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. Well, hell, he reached for his stamp. The loud thunk echoed through the chamber as he pressed it onto the cancellation form. Then another for the new contract. Miller looked up. People call you the silent blacksmith, but today, Mr. Thorne, you made this whole damn building go quiet. Silas said nothing in return. He picked up the signed copy, tucked it beneath his coat, and walked out without another word. Midnight was waiting, steam curling from his nostrils. The ride back was slower, but lighter somehow. By the time he returned to the forge, the sun had lowered. Caleb stood on the porch, his arms crossed, concern etched across his brow. Silas didn't speak. He stepped inside, pulled the document from his coat, and handed it to him. He read it once. Then again, his voice trembled. This is real. Silas nodded. He looked up at him, his lips parted, but no words came. Silas simply said, You are not going anywhere. And with that, he walked past him, limping toward the barn, as if the entire world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Spring crept in slowly, like a promise fulfilled too gently to notice. Snow melted from the eaves, trickled into thirsty earth. Buds pushed through thawing soil. Birds returned, their songs tentative, testing if the silence of winter had truly passed. Caleb Kane remained at the forge. At first, it was just the contract, a piece of paper with legal safety wrapped in Silas Thorne's name. But soon, it was more than that. Lily ran stronger now. Her cheeks flushed pink when she laughed. She helped Silas with the horses each morning, feeding them oats, checking their water, even learning how to gently clean Midnight's hooves under Silas's watchful eye. Every afternoon, Lily would sit cross-legged on the floor near the fireplace, scribbling with charcoal on scraps of paper. Her drawings grew more detailed. First, a house, then a horse, then 3 figures. A man, another man, and a girl holding hands beneath a crooked tree. Is that us? Caleb had asked once, kneeling beside her. Lily only nodded and added one more detail. The sun. Inside the house, the once cold kitchen stirred back to life. Caleb cleaned shelves long untouched, lined jars with checkered cloth, and started cooking again. Simple things. Bean stew, corn griddle cakes, spiced apple slices over the stove. The air smelled like food, not dust. Silas passed through it all with quiet steps. He did not interfere, but he noticed everything. One evening, as the last of the winter wind rattled the shutters, he paused at the kitchen doorway. Caleb stood at the hearth apron tied at his waist, turning biscuits in the oven. His sleeves were rolled and his cheeks were smudged with flour. He did not turn. He only said gently, You do not have to live like a ghost forever, Silas. For a moment he said nothing. Then he limped forward and reached into the oven with thick mitts, pulling out the pan without a word. That night they ate warm biscuits with honey, and Silas stayed in the room until the fire went out. The next day, Silas saddled Midnight and hitched a cart. He called for Lily. We are going into town, he said. Lily scrambled up beside him, eyes wide. Really? Just us? Just us. At the local farm cooperative, Silas let Lily pick a foal, a nervous little pony with a cream-colored coat and black-tipped ears. Lily chose him because his tail curls like Papa's hair when he sleeps. Silas paid cash and helped load the colt. On the way back, Lily could not stop smiling. She named the pony Biscuit. That night, as stars blinked into the sky and crickets dared to sing again, Lily crawled into Silas's lap by the fire, something she had never done before. The girl leaned into his chest and whispered, I think Papa would smile more if you were his brother forever. Silas froze. The words hovered in the air like breath in cold. Then, slowly, his shoulders shook, not from anger or sadness, but laughter. Quiet, unpracticed, real. Lily looked up, confused. Was that funny? Silas ruffled the girl's hair a little, but long after Lily had fallen asleep, curled with Biscuit's blanket in her arms, Silas sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Not as a ghost. Not anymore. Spring came with soft winds and wildflowers that painted the hills in color. Green crept over the meadows like a blessing. The river thawed, trickled, sang again. And in the heart of that blooming season, the silent blacksmith prepared for a celebration. It was a quiet affair held at the forge. There were no decorations but nature's own. A few townsfolk came, those with gentle hearts and long memories. No preacher in robes, only a retired chaplain who once served with Silas in the army. He wore a worn coat and a knowing smile. Caleb stood beneath the wooden arch Silas had built himself, looking healthier than the day they met. Lily walked ahead of them, solemn and proud, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. She had scrubbed her boots until they shone. Her shirt was too big, but she stood straighter than any man. When the moment came, Silas looked at Caleb and took his hand in a firm grip of brotherhood. "I am not good with words," he said quietly, "but I will never leave you or the girl." There were no cheers, no music, just silence, and it was beautiful. After the vows of friendship and loyalty were spoken, and the chaplain nodded his blessing, Silas led Caleb to the east wing of the forge house. It was a room he had repaired over the long winter. Polished floorboards, fresh white curtains, and a window that opened wide to the view of the town square where they had first met. "This is for you," he said simply. Caleb touched the frame of the window, tears in his eyes. "It's perfect." Meanwhile, Lily ran to her new room, where a wooden plaque now hung on the door. Lily Thorne Kane, blacksmith in training. She stared at it for a long time, then looked back at Silas with awe. "You really put my name up?" Silas nodded once. "Forever. Forever." Later that evening, in the warmth of the kitchen, Caleb found something else. On the wall near the pantry, beneath the family clock, a small frame had been hung. Inside it was the letter Lily had written to Santa so many months ago, the one she had handed Silas with her tiny hands and trembling hope. The handwriting was crooked, misspelled in places, but still clear. "I don't want toys. I just want Papa to be okay. And please don't let him cry alone again." Beneath it, in Lily's new handwriting, now a little bolder, she had added, "Santa didn't forget us. He sent Mr. Thorne." Caleb pressed his hand over his mouth, heart full, eyes wet. Outside, the sun was rising. Light poured through the windows like a new beginning. Lily rode Biscuit in slow circles near the barn, laughing as the pony tossed its head. Caleb hung fresh linens on the line, humming softly. Silas leaned against the fence, repairing a loose plank, his hammer steady, his steps firm. He looked at them, not as someone watching a scene, but as someone inside it. For the first time in a very long time, Silas Thorne was not alone. The forge was no longer silent, and the lights in the house would never go dark on Christmas again. If this story warmed your heart, if little Lily's courage, Caleb's strength, and Silas's quiet love left a mark on you, don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to Frontier Heart Stories for more soul-stirring tales from the dusty trails and open skies of the Old West. There's always more love waiting at the edge of the frontier, and you won't want to miss what rides in next. Thanks for watching, and as always, may your fire stay warm and your heart stay wilder than the wind.